Okay, so today we're going to talk about how to make big decisions, like the types of decisions that take longer than 5 minutes to make. It's like whether or not to buy a car, whether to change your career, take a new job, stay in your job or leave, whether to break up with somebody or settle down with somebody, or whether to get married or have kids, or, get divorced, or how to allocate your budget, start a business, all these kinds of things. Okay, because there are a lot of things to consider in order to make your decision with good form. And we want to make sure that we can look at an issue from an expanded view, just so we can make the right decision and run through a decision-making process that can focus our attention on the things that we might miss, like options or preparations or other critical information. So basically, it's to do all the planning necessary to be confident moving forward with a big decision. A lot of what we'll discuss today is based on the work of Chip and Dan Heath. Okay, so, and then there's a whole bunch of other information I'm mixing in from other places. So really, we'd want to think about, like, if we're at this point where we need to make a decision, we want to think about what part of this decision is really the central issue, right? Like, what part is really the central issue? And how important is this on a scale of 1 to 10? Right? Okay. And do you have a timetable for this decision? If so, what's the deadline? Like, what's the maximum amount of time you can delay a decision on this? Right? And if you don't know, you can always ask somebody. Right? Okay. And then I would say, before we go into the decision-making process, you want to get your mood elevated. So never make an important decision when you're in a low mood.
That's like a good idea.
Yeah. That's one of the things people regret most. The decisions they make at the height of emotion, right? Like, and it's just like, when we feel better, we have more access to our wisdom and common sense. We're less reactive, less defensive, less critical. We basically make better decisions when we're in a good mood. So do whatever you have to do to get yourself in a good mood before proceeding through the following steps. So do you have any ideas on what you would do to get yourself into a good mood before you have to make a big decision?
Play some music.
Yeah. And any songs in particular, or types of music?
Sometimes I do like vacation songs, so I feel like I'm on like a tropical beach.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. You could also do like some exercise, go for a walk in nature, lift some weights, talk to somebody you care about on the phone who lifts your spirits. There's lots of different ways we could do that, but basically get into a good mood before you go through the next steps, right?
Yeah.
So then step one, whenever you're making a big decision, is to widen your options. Okay. We don't want to have zebra vision where everything is just black and white. We want to find out what is the gray, like what's the in between. Some of the world's greatest problems involved unlikely combinations that other people overlooked or dismissed or said were impossible, right? So we want to think about how can we combine options and avoid whether or not decisions. Is there a solution that can give you the positive components you were looking for from your options? For example, let's say you're running a business and you're like, do I fire this person or not? Right? Somebody is not working out in their job role. We hired them because we thought they were a great candidate, but they just don't have the technical skills for this job. You might think, well, instead of fire them or not, why don't we think, can we switch them to a different department where they might be a better fit? Right? That's widening our options now.
Okay.
It's like, we don't have to think black or white here. It's even like, I don't know if you remember little Post-it notes, right? They'd used an adhesive that it's kind of like a soft adhesive, so you can put these notes and you can take them off. Well, that adhesive, apparently it was a fail. They wanted to make like a super strong glue and it just ended up being really weak. So instead of thinking, well, do we trash this or not? They thought, well, where might we use this? Well, we could use this. Where might we want to have a weak adhesive? Little Post-it notes. And then that was kind of how they came up with that unlikely invention, right?
I love them. They worked out well for me.
Yeah, exactly. So rather than selecting between two options, can you negotiate a third option? Right? So even if you're like working on job offers and it's this or that, can you negotiate a third option into the mix? You know, what are the potential? So we want to consider, you know, what are the potential synergies between options? How might a combination of options be more beneficial? This is a very important step to go through. And sometimes people have trouble thinking of it. And they're like, I don't know, I can't think of anything. Then I just use the vanishing options approach. It's like, imagine you can't choose any of the options you're considering. So let's say you're going to move to a new place and you're like, okay, well, I got a job in the Hamilton area and I need to decide, do I stay living in Toronto or do I move to Hamilton? And then we could do vanishing options. We'd say, you're not allowed to do either. You're not allowed to stay in Toronto. You're not allowed to move to Hamilton. Then what else could you do? And they could be like, well, I could move to Waterdown. It's a little community outside Hamilton. Oh, maybe that's an option. And then they go there and they find the most beautiful place ever, right? And they're like, this is way better. I'm glad I did this, you know? So that could be an example of how we can use vanishing options. Like if you can't do this, what else could you do? Right? And
Yeah.
I think it's also important to consider past experience. Like, are there any precedents from previous experience that might be relevant now? Have other people been in this situation and what did they do with their options, right? Are there any historical examples we can compare this to? You know, so, you know, it's like if you're deciding what to give somebody for their birthday, you know, you could remember what you've given them previously, you know, or you could consider things like that. I like to use there's also an analogy buffet as an option. And what you do is you take your problem, okay? Let's say you're an athlete that suffered an injury, for example. And you can compare it to a worker that suffered an injury that prevents them from doing their job, right? And you could say, okay, I could be like this. I could be like a worker that can't do their job anymore. And then you could take a look at the decisions they made, right? And you could be like, you know, what solutions did they use, right? They took on work that was less physical. They decided to take on more of a managing admin role for a time. And maybe I could take on more of a technical coaching role, and maybe I could play a different role on the strategy side of things, just like they did in the same situation, rather than if I can't play, I do nothing, right? Like, right. Why don't I negotiate the third option that a factory worker would, right?
Gotcha.
So we just want to kind of see, like, we want to consider what other people have done in similar types of situations that can help us think of options. And then we also want to ask, what's the opportunity cost? Like if we make any of these choices, what else could we do with the same time and money? You know, it's like, maybe we don't buy a car if we're thinking about buying a new car or not, but then like maybe with the same money, we could just buy a new house, right? Like maybe we don't take a job, but with that time, we could take a school course and an educational course, or, you know, travel and visit old friends. So we always want to consider the opportunity cost. So
okay,
that's step one, widen your options. And I would say with this, nothing succeeds like excess. Like just come up with as many options as you can. The best way to come up with a good option is to come up with many options. You know, so just take the machine gun approach and get them all on the radar. Any thoughts about that that step?
Well, I could see where, like, I think the value of maybe having a contrast, like an athlete, or thinking of those situations, because I think sometimes, I know I've been in the shoes where I'm thinking of different jobs and I won't be able to think of that third option. Sometimes we're like a little bit clouded just based on like what's in front of us. So, and I know an approach that worked for me is even just like talking to a friend about it or somebody outside of it, because it just helps you kind of regain perspective and help you define some other options that maybe you're not seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. Just get an outsider point of view.
Yeah,
right.
The black and white is very, very relatable. Very relatable.
Oh yeah, totally. Especially with industry. Like usually somebody who's not in your industry, who's not in that, who doesn't have the same self-limiting biases related to a culture or industry, can
Yeah.
see these things that everyone else is missing.
Yeah. I always think of like, you know, when like the dogs wear the cones, it's like that narrowed perspective. I kind of turn into like the dog with the cone. I'm like, I only have option A or B. What do I choose?
Yeah. So we always want to find that C option, D option, whatever it is. Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. Okay, so that's step one. Now, step two is to like test things out however we can. Reality test your assumptions. Okay. So we want to be able to just test things out, and we want to collect info about the odds of success. You know, is there an expert we can consult? Is there research we can do? You know, what problems does the product, service, or situation currently have? How might you consult interested people to test the waters on possible reactions, like soliciting advice from wise and worthy advisors? How can you test the market instead of jumping right in and spending the money on stuff to see if people want it? An example would be this. I don't know if you know of the Segway. It's kind of like this upright electric scooter type thing. And you're like, I think they use it in Revenge of the Nerds movies and stuff. Anyway, I'm not sure if you've seen them or heard of them.
I don't think so.
But basically you stand on it and it's got handlebars and it's got two wheels and it wheels you around, right?
Okay.
So apparently they spent a lot of money inventing this thing. And they thought, okay, well, people who deliver the mail are going to use this because instead of walking, you're motoring around.
Oh, I know Segway. Yeah.
Yeah. So they thought that, you know, people using mailmen and stuff would be using this. But they didn't test it out. And what they found was that the problem was that the battery couldn't last for a typical mail route. So people would have to stop partway through, go back and charge it. So all of the people in the mail delivery industry weren't interested because the battery didn't have the longevity. But by the time they figured this out, they were already too deeply invested in this product. They had already gone to basically taking it to market and everything else. And it was considered a failure. Like, because I think it costs like $7,000 to $10,000 for it.
Oh, wow.
And so other than just using it recreationally, it doesn't have as much of a practical use as they had assumed.
Gotcha.
But before doing that, had they gone through a decision-making process, they would have been like, okay, we need to test it out. Let's just make sure that, you know, people are actually going to use this the way that we think they do, and we're not missing anything. So you want to get outside your own bias. You know, we all have unconscious incompetence. We all have information we don't know, and we want to be able to get outside that and collect info we can trust. Because of confirmation bias, it leads us to collect skewed, self-serving information. So we want to get out of our own confirmation bias, right? So we'd want to ask ourselves, like, how can we verify all this information? Because a correct decision can never result from incorrect knowledge. And we need to know the difference between true knowledge and opinion, hopeful expectation, or rumor, right?
Okay.
So one of the things that I read about was that, you know, the policy on Iraq and weapons of mass destruction was made on the basis of flawed intelligence and assessments. And that intelligence wasn't challenged, and it should have been. And the innumerable British and Iraqi deaths which resulted were based on this flawed information for making a decision. That comes from the book Aristotle's Way from Edith Hall, that reference. Right? But it's like people died because nobody second guessed this thing. So basically we want to think like, how can we run small experiments to test your theories before jumping in head first? How can you test drive your options? So for example, if I think there's like a train or a plane going by, sorry about the background noise.
It's okay. I can't really hear it.
Okay, so for example, if you decided you wanted to become a physiotherapist,
Yeah.
it might be helpful to go in and job shadow a physiotherapist for a day, just to see what a day is like. Then you might decide, oh my gosh, all this person does is like photocopy sheets of exercises and hand them to people randomly and just rub gel on their shoulders and stuff all day and talk about Survivor and who's getting voted off the island. like be like, I don't know if I really want to do this. It doesn't seem as exciting, like,
Yeah.
so you might decide that's not for me. But then you might be like, well, over there on the other side of the room, there's this person called an osteopath. And, like, I really love what they're doing. And I've seen some exciting breakthrough results over there. And who knows, maybe maybe that can be my third option that I didn't know about before. Right?
Yeah, I think that's super important. That's a great example. Even just like talking to people, let's say in the industry, or maybe who have made the decision that you're questioning, and kind of get their review.
Yeah, just to kind of test things out and save us, because, sometimes you get what you want and realize it's not what you want. Right? Like, that's now it wasn't a big decision, but I set up like a home fitness studio, and I thought, oh, I'll just work out of my home studio all the time. Like, this will be great. And I thought I could do that full time. And then when I started doing it, I'm like, I'm getting cabin fever. Like, it's just too isolated here. Like, this isn't really what I want. I need to get out and mix with people at large. Like, just, be more integrated in society. I can't just be hidden away in my home studio training people like all the time, but you realize these things through experience. And I think the important thing is this: human beings are terrible at predicting the future, but they think they're good at predicting the future. That's why gambling is a business. I think this team's going to win. I think that team's going to win.
Yep. That's too funny.
Research has shown that expert predictions are often worse than simple extrapolations from base rates. So it's like, I've even seen like an octopus predict World Cup winners better than the experts, just by eating food with a certain flag on it. Like, it's ridiculous. So it's humbling, but I think at some point we got to come to terms with the fact that if we're human, chances are we suck at predicting the future, So now the key is here, like, let's say you're designing a product or something, or you want to, in order to test the waters, you want to create a low cost, quick prototype so you can learn early what works and what doesn't and what can be improved. Because if you spend a lot of money on your experiment, you're naturally going to feel more invested in the result. Yeah. You want to make it so that you don't care as much. So you shouldn't be too invested in this experiment, right? There's a saying, it's easier to use an eraser at the drafting board than a sledgehammer at the construction site. So Frank Lloyd Wright said that. He was a famed architect. Yeah. So, another example would be J.C. Penney actually used like this fair and square, straightforward pricing. They thought, forget all the sales and fake sales and all this and that. We're going to use fair and square, straightforward pricing. We're going to give them those sale prices without calling it a sale and just build our reputation on that. But when they tested it out, they didn't realize that customers enjoy the thrill of feeling like they won and the satisfaction of scoring a great deal and then bragging about how much they saved. They love to show off their savings, feel like they're winning at the game of shopping. Like, look, this was normally this much. I got it for this much. They couldn't do that. They're like, yeah, J.C. Penney has fair and square, straightforward pricing. I don't get to brag to my friends about how much money I saved or anything. So it actually, like, when they experimented with that, it didn't work because they didn't realize the psychology of the customers was such that they love that thrill of feeling, even if it's a fake thrill. Like, it wasn't really a sale. Hey, we're just going to we're going to overprice it for a week and then we're going to mark it down 50%. Nobody's going to buy it in week one, and then by week two, everyone's going to buy it at the price we initially wanted to sell it at.
It's true.
So that's now in Chip and Dan Heath, they wrote the book Decisive, which is what this conversation is based on. Their basic format, which is W, widen your options, R, reality test your assumptions. Now we're going on to A, which is attain emotional distance before making a decision. So we don't want to be short-sighted. We don't want to be, get caught away in our emotional whims and impulses, right? So a lot of times people will share that the worst decisions they made in life were often in the grip of visceral emotion, anger, lust, anxiety, and greed. And the goal isn't to eliminate emotion, but to honor the emotions that actually count. Okay. So the decisions we make in times of stress often meet our needs in the moment, but they have to be explored once the stressor is gone to ensure the decision is one that truly serves us long term outside of that moment, you know? So it's often important, like with big decisions, to just be able to take a high level overview and think long term of what do you want out of life and what are the best options to take you there? What kind of legacy do you want to leave inside other people? How do you want to set an example for others? What values do you want to represent? Right? Do you want to be a person that, you know, takes extreme ownership, or do you want to be a person that's known for blaming others and playing up the victim role? Right? Do you want to be a person that is known for thinking of others, or a person that's always like, what's in it for me? You know, do you want to be known as a person that was always about self-gratification, self-ambition, you know, or do you want to be known as a person that gives strength to other people? Right? Do you want to be known as a person that brings others up or brings them down through gossip and negative judgment and all of these things? So really it helps to be intentional about, you know, if this world is a movie, you want to be clear on the character you want to play. And that can help you make your decisions. Like, do I want to be somebody who's always, you know, do I believe things matter most, or do I believe people matter more than things? You know, like there's a whole bunch of different value choices. And this is a topic for a future discussion, is doing a deep dive on setting our intentional values on how we're going to live our life, right? So that we can stay on script with the character we want to play. You know, there might be times we get off script, but if you don't have a script and you're not thinking about this, it means you're just picking up whatever feels good in the moment, typically. And a lot of times that might make you the villain in life. But every villain thinks they're the hero, by the way. So everybody, you know, anyone who's ever been mean-spirited to you or anyone else and selfish and all that stuff, if you ask them, they would tell you they're a good person. That's the delusion of being a villain, right? So but we can have the same delusions at times. So we want to just make sure that we get clear on what do I want out of life and what are the best options to take us there. That helps us to just distance ourselves and get some clarity before making a big decision, right? Now, there's also a technique. It's called the 10-10-10 rule. And you ask yourself, how will I feel about this decision 10 minutes from now? Okay. How will I feel about it 10 months from now? How will I feel about it 10 years from now? Right? Like, are you standing in your power, or are you making decisions to try to please somebody else? You know, are you putting somebody else's happiness before your own, like a parent's, what they want you to be doing or something like that, you know?
I think a good example of that too is even just like, you know, when I know growing up or even like in university and so forth, like the number one thing was like, I got to have like a high paying job and like I have to have a salary. Like that's like, you know, a milestone or a point to hit and whatnot. And, you know, it's like sometimes you get so caught up in trying to get to that because you think that's where you're supposed to go, but we rarely like question like why, or do I even want that? So
yeah, a lot of people will prioritize money over character development and growth. They'll just take the job that will pay the most rather than the job that'll help them learn and become a better person. And so they're not investing in themselves, but they're investing in short-term bill payments instead as a greater priority, right? So, and that's where we want to get clear on values. Like, what are we ultimately valuing most? Money, power, prestige, perfection of character, or whatever it is, right? Like spirituality, who knows, right? Yeah. There's no right or wrong answer on that. I think there's times in life when certain answers are right and certain answers are wrong, depending on where somebody's at, and everybody's different. But because I think even doing the wrong thing for a while is a good thing, because it really helps you with that learning lesson. Experience of suffering is a great reinforcer of truth and wisdom, you know, that something doesn't work.
100%. Yeah.
So I think also it's important to consider who else will be affected by this decision and how. You know, are you considering how this choice will affect your loved ones? Can you look at this situation from the perspective of all parties who will be affected?
I never thought of that.
Yeah, it's a really good way to think of things, because often the regrets are the impacts of decisions and how it affects other people that wasn't considered, right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So, and then in regards to this decision, here's a couple things to consider. It's the head, heart, gut analogy. So, in regards to this decision, what does my head say I should do? What does my head, this is usually what looks good logically, right?
Yep.
Then what does my heart say I should do? And this is usually what feels good, you know, what's comfortable, perhaps what's easy, what you know. And then, you know, third is like, what does my gut say I should do? And this is what just feels right. You know, you just look inside and ask your inner guidance to help in this decision-making process. What advice emanates from the core of your being? You know, so that's a good little process that might bring some insights. And also, here's one. Have you ever heard of that before? The head, heart, gut approach to decision making?
I've heard of, yeah, no, I've definitely heard of it before.
Yeah, so it's something to consider just to get a more thorough perspective. This is a really important one that I'll use like as a quick, if somebody catches me on the spot with something, I tell them this. It's the best friend test. I would say, what would you tell your best friend to do in this situation? You know,
Yep.
and then I'd say, do you think maybe you should take your own advice?
Always.
How will you do that and when? Yeah. So it's like, if I really need to get to a quick shortcut, I
Yeah.
just tell them, what would you tell your best friend to do about this?
Yeah. It's easier to, as naturally, it's easier to like give advice to other people, but then taking our own advice is a little bit
Yeah.
more challenging.
Yeah. You can't see the forest
Yeah.
from the trees, right? So sometimes we just need that outside perspective. And then another thing that I call it the ancient friend. You know, we use this in the self-acceptance talk. It's just, imagine you have this all-knowing, all-loving, wise best friend, you know, that knows everything about you and everything about your circumstances. What would their compassionate words of advice be to you in this moment of making this decision? If they're 10 out of 10 loving, 10 out of 10 wise, and they know everything about you and everything about the situation, what would this imaginary best friend tell you? What would be their advice? And that can help us access some wisdom that might not be on the surface as well. So basically, like, attaining emotional distance is kind of like this. It's kind of like you take a car for a test drive and you experience the new car smell and you're like, I want it, right? Like, and you make the decision to buy. And it's like, well, we don't want to be pulled into that kind of like, you know, or maybe it's like you meet up with an ex and things are really great and you think, that's it, we're going to move in again together or whatever. And it's like, oh, you got caught up in the moment. You forgot, you lost sight of everything else that's important to consider, right? So it's like, we don't want to get caught. We don't want the emotion, short-term emotion, to conflict with making the best choice. You know, so that's something to think about there. So the final category is P. Prepare to be wrong. Okay. So
Perfect.
what unanticipated events might drastically affect how things proceed? You know, it's like, let's say you're going to hire out a company to do your website. Well, what happens if that web programmer gets hit by a bus? Who will take over and how? Or if it's like a small company, it's like, no, you're messed up. You're too dependent on that one or two individuals, right? So it's like, you know, bad luck can never be fully preempted, but awareness of its possibility is part of the deliberative process, right? So we want to reflect on what could happen to probe for weakness in our plans, so those potential failures can be correctly perceived, addressed, and properly endured if need be. right? So we want to be able to prepare for these kinds of contingencies. And when change is gradual, like sometimes change is very gradual and we don't notice it. It's like that old tale about, I don't know who did this, but boiling a frog. It's like you put a frog in a pot of water, and if you slowly raise the temperature degree by degree, the frog will boil to death and won't jump out because it doesn't notice the gradual change. Well, we also want to have something when things are changing in a bad direction in results in terms of our decision, we want to be able to make ourselves notice. Okay, so we want to have like an alarm or a tripwire in place that can cap our risk. All right, and at least quiet our mind until this trigger is hit. So I'll give you an example of this was Kodak. You know, everyone remembers the saying it's a Kodak moment because of those actual physical cameras and actual photographs, right? They were doing so well, like in photography, and all of a sudden digital photography came into the mix, and they had to have a conversation like, do we get on board with digital photography or not? And the leadership decided not to. They decided, you know what, people like developing the photos and having the photos and the photo albums, and they love this. So we don't think that digital photography is going to go anywhere. And plus we're really confident in our decision making because look how good we've done already. It's a Kodak moment. Everybody knows about us. We're killing it. Therefore, our opinions are very reliable, right? Like there's a lot of bold assumptions made there. So what happened, what they should have done is made a tripwire. Like once digital photography is, 5 or 7% of the market share, like then we get on board. But they didn't even set up a tripwire, right? They were just too confident. Like, so what happened was that basically digital photography took off. And even though a lot of people said they wouldn't get on board with digital photography because they like physical photographs, and that's what they told the Kodak people, they changed their minds. They were like, nope, I like digital photography. So everybody who they thought would be like their loyal customers, all abandoned ship. They're like, we don't have to worry about it. All of our customers are saying this. They're saying they don't care about it. We've already done some quick surveys, right? Everyone changed their mind, right? So by the time Kodak realized they had a problem, it was too late. And the business didn't survive because they didn't have a tripwire from which to act, right?
Yeah.
So and that's the key, is to have this sort of a tripwire, like we will act when blank. So what's a worst possible outcome prediction? What if blank happens? We will act when blank when it hits this point, and we will respond in these following ways, right? So we kind of predict a worst possible outcome. When will we act? How will we respond? That's the way to set up a tripwire, to safeguard yourself so you don't make the mistakes that Kodak had made, right? And other companies. The other thing is to also consider best possible outcomes. Like something might work unpredictably good, So an example of this was, I believe there's a company called Minnetonka, and they had developed like the hand pumps for soap. Okay. Now we have hand pumps for soap everywhere now, but I remember when it was just bars of soap everywhere, and that's all they had. You go to a hotel and it's bars of soap and this and that. Mm-hmm. So they invented like the hand pumps. We're going to put liquid soap in a hand pump, right? So they decided like, we want to make sure that, this could go unpredictably good. And so if it does, how can we be prepared? Like if it goes unpredictably good, all the big players in the soap game are going to get on board, and they're going to beat us out. They're going to bully us out of the market because we're a smaller company. So we need to be prepared for that. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to create a 2-year exclusive deal with the world's producers of those plastic pumps so that the competitors can't enter the market very easily, right? Unless they're going to make their own plastic pumps, but that's going to take them too long to figure out, too much money and effort, right? So we're going to do an exclusive deal. So that's what they did. And it worked because
Perfect.
it secured them in the liquid soap market. The competitors couldn't enter the market because of this exclusive deal. It gave them such a head start. It was a huge win for them, right? But it was having that foresight,
Right.
in the decision-making process, like being very strategic. So they prepared for a best possible outcome. So we could ask ourselves the same thing. What are some of the best possible outcomes? And when will we act and how will we act? Right? So they'd say one of the best possible outcomes that, all the hotel chains are deciding to go with liquid soaps and all the public bathrooms and all this stuff. So let's act on it like now, right? And let's act by creating exclusive deals, right? Because it's worth the investment.
Perfect.
So, and then another thing I think to think about is, so we kind of went over like W is widen your options, R, reality test, A, attain emotional distance, P, prepare for a future that's unpredictably bad or a future that's unpredictably good, right? And then the other thing is gather the tribe. So if you're involved with people, engage the support of others to help facilitate your decision and help in the execution. Bring them into the vision if possible. Get them involved in it so that they'll take ownership and they'll take ownership with this and be able to have a sense of fulfillment and pride in it as well. If it's a team decision, just involve the pack, right? So basically, like in summary, I would say there's 4 questions we should ask ourselves when there's a decision to be made. A big decision that takes longer than 5 minutes. How can I widen my options? How can I test my options? How can I remove short-term emotion? How can I prepare for a future that's unpredictably good or bad? Then we will make better decisions. Okay.
Perfect.
And here's the thing. Your life legacy, or anybody watching this, your life legacy is all about the decisions you make. The decisions are the hinges of your destiny. Yet so few people take the time to map out the best process for decision making and to make decisions with good form. But the actions you take will transcend your own lifetime and change the world forever. You can never guarantee that you'll make the correct decision, but you can guarantee that you prepare for the decision taking in the manner that maximizes your chance of success and happiness. But no matter what decision you make, I'd say no pressure. You'll receive life lessons either way. If you choose to get married, you'll receive life lessons on marriage. If you choose to stay single, you'll receive life lessons on being single. If you choose to change careers, you'll get life lessons from the new career. If you choose to stay in your current career, believe me, it'll still continue to pump out some life lessons for you, right? In all kinds of unpredictable ways. You'll get a new boss who's envious of you, or you'll get all kinds of new employee that is causing these kinds of challenges, right? So all kinds of things. Any choice is going to bring the life lessons as long as you're learning and growing. You're fulfilling your destiny here on earth. There's many paths you can take, but with experience and reflection, all roads will lead to a higher, more enlightened version of you that has a greater understanding. And that's the important thing to remember, is just to reflect on your experience, and you will be making progress in the most meaningful dimension of life, right? Increasing your understanding for everything. So that is the walkthrough process on how to make big decisions. It's a good conversation to revisit whenever you're in those moments. I know that I've given this to people when they've considered moving or all kinds of different things, and it really helps them feel confident moving forward. I can't think of a time when I've ever walked somebody through this process and they felt like they made the wrong decision. Whenever we've done this, it always felt like the right decision for everybody who's gone through this process with me. And even now, like none of it's turned out to be wrong, but that doesn't mean, we can never predict what's going to happen, right? So any thoughts on this tool?
Well, I like how it's a very direct approach, and I feel like it's easy to navigate, but probably something a lot of people don't have awareness on or have ever been questioned on. So I can see why it would be super valuable in life decisions, because sometimes we act on impulse and sometimes we just use other people's judgments. But I think it's important to kind of consider that whole picture before making those bigger decisions so that you're set up to stay like grounded in what you truly want.
Yeah, real. That's an awesome point. Awesome point. And making decisions is a life skill, and it's one of the most important life skills. But too often people don't take it seriously, and I don't blame them for that. I think they were just never told of the important. They were never made aware of the importance of taking it seriously.
Right.
And I don't think people were ever shared the wisdom that is to be had on making important decisions. Like making decisions with good form is a life skill. You can learn it just like anything else. And it's arguably one of the most important life skills you can develop. So, your life matters. Everybody's life is important. So we owe it to ourselves to honor and respect ourselves by giving careful consideration to the important decisions of our life.
I agree.
All right. You did an awesome job out there today. Any other key takeaways from today's discussion?
Utilize this.
Yes.
Yeah, have it accessible.
Yeah, keep it in your back pocket, and even rewatching this recording when it's necessary with a pen and paper in hand or just typing up responses can really help you map out your situation whenever needed. Like, just keep this in your toolkit for how to successfully live a human life and meet the challenges of life, right? It's like, okay, I need to know that I can make awesome decisions, right? Like, where's that decision-making process? Awesome. And then, once again, thanks for you participating, for sharing this conversation as a gift to other people who might benefit from it. Strangers we don't know, even, who will watch the recording, but even though we don't know them, we care about strangers. That's why we're doing this. It's like, we just look at everyone as friends. We're here to be friends with everybody. And if somebody's a stranger, that's just a friend we haven't met yet. So, I think I commend you on taking your learnings and graciously sharing it with everyone else out there who might benefit as your gift of love and wisdom to the world. So let's do go team on 3. Ready?
Ready.
Here we go. 1, 2, 3. Go team.
Go team. Thank you.
See ya.